Satan, Lucifer, Belial, Leviathan, Samael.
I wanted to make a short video to explain a process. I'm often asked about the higher satanic processes that I mention in my books. And I feel the best way to maybe open that subject matter is by first explaining what I mean by a process. Those of you associated with the business world or with process management will probably recognize this. It is a flowchart, and it's going to be very generic. What I really want to do right now is just kind of explain what I mean by process, and then in the future we will talk more about the individual processes. But this is a way to capture and document those processes. So in most processes you have a starting point and you have an ending point. And in between you have steps. And these are usually indicated by a box or other flowchart type symbol. They're usually linked in some type of software like Visio, or you can even use PowerPoint to build one of these. And then they actually proceed to maybe a individual decision point. And that decision point may go to a certain box. This would be maybe if the answer to the decision point question is yes, it may go to here. If the decision point question is no, perhaps it proceeds to the end of the process. And then inside each one of these boxes would be the actual name of the individual step in the process. So maybe in our case we would say that maybe this is a prepare for a ritual. Maybe the next one is perform the ritual. The next one would be maybe record it. So remember, we can use scribe. In my books I actually use ends, ENDS, that you can use after the performance of the ritual. And then perhaps there is a lessons learned type event. What went right, what went wrong. And then, whatever a particular decision here. So there is a question that is asked, and if the answer is yes, you might go down to this particular box. If the answer to that particular question is no, you would proceed to the end of the process. So again, this is just a very high level type document, and you would have the name of the particular process would be here. Now this would be the high level process. However, we could and often will have subordinate processes or procedures or things that help us to achieve what is in this box. So for instance, we may have another sub-process here that has individual steps, and by performing these individual steps, that completes the first box. Or what you may have is you may have multiple sub-processes, and each one of these processes would then build up to the next process. Like maybe here we have 2 boxes and they have some steps, and if you perform all of those steps, then you would take the output from this and you would input it into this particular process, and the output from this particular process would actually complete this step. So in this case, we would just remove this, and we can see that this sub-process plus this sub-process, the output from doing those would be an input now into this process, and then an output from this would actually complete, in our case, in this example, the preparation step, and so on and so forth. So we would see that maybe we have several different sub-processes for our performance. And by doing each one of these, it would roll up into the actual performance step of the high-level process map. And then the same thing for perhaps ends. So we would have certain things that we would want to take care of here. So what we might do is separate those into the actual acronym. If you remember what that acronym is, I'll give you a moment to think about that. But maybe those things all roll up into this process step here. So eat, nest, drink, and scribe. Remember that? And then possibly a lessons learned would have some maybe some documentation that you would work through, kind of like a procedure that would make sure that you accomplished everything you need to in the lessons learned. And then perhaps there may be a return to this step for the scribe step again, so that you can incorporate your lessons learned information into your grimoire. And from this step, we may now just proceed right on to a decision point, whatever that may be. And then if the answer is yes, or you can choose whatever these individual questions are, then that would either take you to step 5, which again may be set up to where several sub-processes would lead you to the accomplishment of this actual high-level process step. And then perhaps from here, you would proceed to the end after completing this. So when I say a process map, this is really what I'm talking about here. And I think that the flowchart is a good illustration that will help you. And you can even use this in your grimoire, because you can actually take your grimoire and on the individual pages of the grimoire, you could actually document what the individual process is, and then you could actually decompose each one of these tasks into individual tasks. And you would explain which one of these or what each of these boxes entail in the actual body of the grimoire page. Now you can probably see an advantage of this when we start talking about things like alchemy, right? So if we were to mix certain chemicals together, then we would expect a certain outcome, right? Whatever that outcome is, it should be a desired outcome, but it should also be an expected outcome as well. In other words, you would not want to experiment by adding a third chemical, which honestly may cause a fire, right? So, by documenting your alchemy in your grimoire with the process steps and the sub-processes actually supporting the overall process, it's almost like making a recipe for success. You start, you add different variables or different types of ingredients, and you always get the expected outcome each time. This is the power of the process flow map, and it will help you, especially in organizing your grimoire and being able to repeat these things, because remember, you want to be able to go into your grimoire and you want to be able to easily locate a certain recipe, and it may be an actual process, right? Or it may be a certain ritual. And by having this in your grimoire, then you will be able to actually complete these things the same way each time. And when combining these with your lessons learned, what happens is it begins to result in additional pages in your grimoire that are now tried and true recipes for a certain outcome. So I encourage you to use the process map. Use the flowchart. Decompose, again, that's actually what it's called. Decompose the process steps into smaller steps that are more easily performed. How do you know when you have enough process steps? When things are easy and simple enough that by combining all of these things together, you're going to get exactly what you want every time, with absolutely no question. So I hope that this explanation of the process flowchart helps you, and I encourage you to use it in everything you do, whether it is ritual, whether it is rites, whether it is preparation of your sanctum. All of these things can ultimately flow up into a successful process map, and each box now becomes several steps so that you can get that expected and desired outcome every time. This is the second episode in the Satanic Processes series, and I feel that in order to properly set you up for success, what we need to do is we need to start by using some of what we learned in episode 1, but also using this episode to clearly define what the process is going to be for you. Again, I want you to be successful in this endeavor, and obviously being able to understand everything in a building block method, I feel, is going to be important. So let's get started. First of all, this process that we're going to use, we'll just call this learning. Now, this learning process works pretty much the same for all people. There are some people that are more inclined to go faster through this process, but I believe that most people will concur with this, and if properly applied, you will be able to pick up what we're going to be looking at in future episodes, because some of the information that I'm going to share with you needs to be broken down into small bites in order to fully understand the nuances about the subject matter as well, so that we don't skim over the information, because there are a lot of good tidbits that are in the actual details of this. So the process that we're going to use while we're going through this, and I'm going to incorporate this in every episode, is going to follow a similar type cadence as we looked at in episode 1. So we're going to start, and our first box of the process is going to be exposure to the subject matter and the ability to pick up on the subject matter and regurgitate it without maybe understanding what all those nuances are. And we call this rote learning. And this follows the, again, convention that most people pick up as they're learning some new subject matter. So we're going to expose you to the information, and you may not really understand why you're being exposed to the information. For instance, let's use an example. I would like for you to learn this series of numbers. Now, if you, in fact, say these over and over and over and over again, you may be able to recite these numbers back to me, not really understanding what the numbers mean, but you could reproduce the pattern of numbers, and symbolically you may actually come up with your own idea of exactly what these numbers mean, or you can use an associative process to associate the numbers with some type of cadence for you to be able to reproduce them. In other words, a person may think that, okay, 3 and then half of 3 is 1.5, so we'll take a 1, and 3 and 1 is 4. If we add 5, that's 9, and so on and so forth. Again, not really meaning anything to anyone except for the person that is using the rote level of learning. The next portion of this, once the rote has been used, is the understanding or understand. And what happens in this step is you begin to understand what the information is and what it may mean. In other words, if I use the same example of these numbers, but now I simply do this, then you might quickly understand that this is a date correlating to March 19th of 1968. If I clarify that for you, now you begin to understand exactly what this sequence of numbers is. But it, at the rote level, has really no meaning to you, but now it takes on a meaning of itself. Or if I were to do this for those in other countries, they might understand this as well. The 19th day of March 1968. So that's the understand portion. The next portion is what we're going to refer to as the application step. So now, once you have memorized this number sequence and you begin to understand what that number sequence is, you might understand that this particular number sequence might be even a person's password. So you begin to understand that 31968 might be a way to actually access someone's account. Okay? Or it may be their PIN number at the ATM, right? So again, you're now applying this sequence of numbers at the application level. And then finally, we have the correlation step. And the correlation step is really where the information, and that's all this is at the rote level, is just numbers. It's not really even information you can use. This step is where this information now could be used in other type situations. So you may understand that different people use their birthday, and it may or may not be this particular birthday, but you correlate the fact that people use a birthday, and now you can apply that knowledge to other types of situation. The correlation situation, or the process box for correlation, is really what we're wanting to get to as quick as we possibly can. This is what some people might crassly call the money shot. This is exactly where you're going to be able to take the understanding, the rote, the application, and you're going to be able to put it together into your own type situation, where now you can apply the information, but not only that, but you can also correlate it to other similar informations. And this is what I like to call the information becomes your own. And that's at the correlation step. Now, even though this may actually come to an end in our process, there are also going to be things that build and may actually take you back into the application, or they may even take you back into the understanding step in order for you to come forward with new information and apply that. And then through that application, you may be able to actually add a different correlation or multiple correlations that you can apply to any of your other instances here. So this is our learning process, and this is what we're going to be using as we go through this series. And again, I felt that it was important enough so that you would understand that the learning part of this is going to take time. So be patient with yourself and understand that while you may walk away with the information and an understanding of the information, you may not truly be able to apply it or correlate it until some amount of time passes. Again, don't be too tough on yourself, because time is going to be a part of this, and you may need to come back to some of the previous lessons to be able to truly understand or truly apply the information and ultimately go to this step, which is exactly what we're wanting to do when we call the information our own knowledge. So I hope this will help. This will certainly be our roadmap going forward.